I've started the recording of the webinar, and I think Ewan and James, we might kick off. So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Claire, I'm the Senior Campaign Manager here at Birchal, and I'm delighted to be joined by James and Ewan from SmartOysters. They're running an EOI campaign on the platform at the moment, looking to go into investment opportunity, and we thought what a great time and way to connect with potential investors and interested parties in the company through an online webinar. So thank you so much for joining me, the two of you. For those of you who are attending the webinar, how today's session will run. So Ewan and James are going to go through a really quick pitch deck about SmartOysters for about 15-20 minutes, tell us about the company, who it is, how they started it, what they've been doing to date, and what they're looking to raise and what they want to do with the money. I believe we also get a little sneaky demo as well of the platform, which is absolutely epic. And then from there, we'll be going into Q&A. So if you have a question throughout the webinar, please pop it in the Q&A button down the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to it in the Q&A at the end, which will allow about 30 to 40 minutes for that. So yeah, get your questions ready. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Ewan. Welcome.
G'day Claire, g'day everybody. Yeah, first off, before we jump into a pitch deck, I'd just like to say, really excited about using the crowdfunding platform. It's an opportunity that we haven't really had before. I never really knew that we could do, which is to get people involved, people who either followed my journey through oyster farming, love oysters, or just love sustainable seafood. So that's why we're crowdfunding. It's already been a really cool sort of process, and to have such a great response in the first week. I think 240 people expressing interest in investing in SmartOysters. So really cool. I'll share my screen and run through a pitch deck and just talk you through SmartOysters. Let's try that again. So you should be able to see the pitch deck for SmartOysters and, you know, our vision of creating a better world one farm at a time. I'll talk to that a little bit more as we go through about how, you know, why that's our vision and how we think we can actually achieve that. But my journey as an oyster farmer, so I've been an oyster farmer now for 16 years. I did a university degree in marine biology, and it was actually my father's idea to get into oyster farming. I was doing some fish farming. I liked aquaculture. I was doing also some work experience on a prawn farm. And my father asked me one day, he goes, well, what about oyster farming? You know, why don't we get into that? And my answer was, well, it's a good idea. Oysters are really sustainable. We don't have to feed them. We don't have to treat them. They grow naturally in commercial quantities in the estuaries. And the south coast where I'm from is a perfect environment for it. The next week he rang me up and he said, I've quit my job and I'm buying an oyster farm. And that's how we got into it. I was 24 years old, very naive. I thought, yep, I'll work twice as hard as the next guy and make twice as much money. Of course, you get into the business and you realize there's a lot more to it than that. And it really set us on a journey where we took over quite an old rundown farm. We upgraded the technology, making the operations more efficient. Even as I was doing that, I realized I wasn't making enough money through, you know, wholesale supply chains to be, you know, profitable. So then I started a marketing company called Signature Oysters. So Signature Oysters is about provenance, about promoting the story of the farmer. And I've started with just Ewan McCash at Signature Oysters, packing and sending oysters direct to restaurants. With a flyer with our story and, you know, details about the river that we grow oysters. And soon enough, I think we had 25 farms, all packing and sending oysters via Signature Oysters to restaurants all over Australia. So now I had a very sort of modern farm. I was making a premium on our oysters, but still struggling because the more I grew the market, the more I spent time away from the farm, and ultimately the farm management fell down. That decade of learning how to farm on the Clyde River really had, you know, all that expertise was in my head. And I was only every time I went away from the farm management would fall down. We did have a database system. So, So we did record our stock movements on the farm and on paper, and then it was double entry, and then we go and put it in a PC database. So I was using software that whole time, but even then it wasn't really fit for purpose. It was quite complex, and I couldn't really hand it over to anyone in that way. To give you an idea of oyster farming and a day in the life of oyster farms is, our farm has 34,000 oyster baskets. We handle 600 to 1,000 of them a day. They can be picked up or deployed at anywhere of 200 different locations. There's 8 different crops. There's 16 different sizes. And on our farm, each one of those oysters need to be graded every 4 months and flipped and dried, air dried, to reduce marine fouling every 2 to 4 weeks. So that's the kind of the base sort of information, the things that you're trying to manage in your head, on a day-to-day basis. And that's what SmartOysters has solved for me. So this first slide here, we talk about the farming environment is complex, continually changing. That's true. Just generally, it's also more true in terms of the climate change we're experiencing. But if you're a farmer, it's not only knowing what to do and when to do it, but also what to do on any given day when it's windy, the tides are always changing, there's rain, there's other weather events. Of course, the other challenge for managing a farm and really capturing that, that data digitally is that it's time consuming and disruptive to the job. You've got wet fingers, you're out in the wind, you've got a moving boat. How do you do that with ease? And what I've already talked to is that when you have a changing environment, when it is hard to actually take records and notes when out in the water, farmers tend to fall back on their memory. And even though I had myself a database system, ultimately most farms, even large farms, it's the farm managers, the guys on a day-to-day basis, just remembering what they need to do, using those years of expertise about what needs to happen in that farm on that particular location. So the challenge for many farms is then, how do I keep growing? I get to my farm to a certain size, but if I'm the only person that knows what to do and what to do it, if I'm trying to remember it all, how do I bring on new staff? How do I grow the business? So it was about 4 years ago that I went looking for a solution. Over the period of my farming career, we'd gone from having no mobile phones just about to smartphones. I could do everything else on my smartphone, emails, video calls. I thought, why couldn't I manage my farm using my phone? I went looking for a solution. I didn't find one, but I did find my quite amazing co-founders, James, who's here today, and Philip, and they really understood not just that I was looking for a solution to manage my farm, but also the importance of making sure farms are digital ready. So if we are going to go out there and collect information to help manage the farm better, let's make sure we collect it in a way that creates value for the farmer down the track. And I'll talk about that in slides as we go. We focused on operations. So a lot of farm management tools focus on production. They focus on the performance of the oyster through the farming system. With oyster farming, and potentially also about inputs, how much feed or fertilizer or treatments you need to put into, fish farming or prawn farming or agricultural farming. With oysters, we're sustainable. We don't need feed. Oysters eat plankton, just that occurring naturally in the environment. And so that really helped clear the air. We knew that to be a good farmer, you need to know where your oysters are, what they are, when you need to go back, and what you need to do next. So the focus we could see was operations. If we could get the farm actually perform better. So we're not measuring the performance of the oyster through the farming system. We're measuring the farm performance. How efficiently is the farm being managed? Is it on track? How robustly is the farmer sticking to their own schedules? And that way, really drive farm performance. So SmartOysters, it consists of a phone app. It's GPS based. It captures critical farm activity like stock movements, grading and drying schedules, repairs and maintenance, and harvest and sales. one of the things I didn't touch on, but obviously I talked sort of to the idea of all those stock movements we do on a day-to-day basis, but also repairs and maintenance. It's a really neat little tool. If you're out on the farm and you're trying to beat the tide to do a harvest and you see something's broken, with SmartOysters, you can quickly take a photo, it drops a pin and automatically assigns that task to whoever's accountable or responsible for the repairs and maintenance. And it means you just don't have to remember it. Previously, you'd be out there and you'd either have to try and remember to go back to that spot and fix it on another day, or try and stop and do it right there and then, which is never that ideal. So the other half of SmartOysters is really about data and giving the farmer insights about their farm. So that's a web-based dashboard. And as I said, this is like farm activity data. We really focus on telling the farmer, we capture the simple things like farm inventory and the value of the farm, but we also look to give farmers information about how efficiently they're operating, how many baskets they can handle in a certain time, and give them insights on how to grow their business. Beyond oysters, well, it turns out by actually focusing on farm operations, we've solved the same problem. We've discovered that this same problem occurs in other sectors. And to give you a quick analogy, I did have that moment a few years back after we created SmartOysters. I got off the phone from a farmer in the USA, and I had the moment when I realized that in solving my own farming problem, I'd also discovered that this was a real problem worldwide. Pretty much every farmer I talked to was struggling with their farm operations, how to capture them, how to run them more efficiently and not rely on their memory, and run, work 7 days a week. Yeah, so we've got a pilot program with a mussel farm, with a finfish farm, a sustainable finfish farm, and we've also had pilot programs on seaweed farms. So this niche that the way we approach SmartOysters seems to be a niche that's a gap in a lot of industries. You've got smart shrimp there. The shrimp industry is huge worldwide. We don't have a heap of information, but we know it's a big industry, and we've had inquiries from shrimp farmers in Southeast Asia. So we're looking to also chase that market down the track. Beyond farm operations, we are collecting data to expand that can expand into these areas. So one problem farmers have once they have their operations under control and they're running really efficiently is how do they access capital to grow? So we're looking to use SmartOyster data to actually de-risk leasing or financing of oyster farms, whether it's through bank loans, investment, or renting operator capital. Certification, the data that we capture with SmartOysters, just as the farmer goes about doing his business, captures the provenance of the oysters to an unprecedented level, right down to the lease and line, and actually the GPS location of where those oysters were last harvested, how many that were there, who harvested them, what age the oysters are, how they were being grown. So really powerful provenance data that'll be valuable to farmers. Obviously, we have data about what's coming through the pipeline. So potential data about that'll help farmers market their oysters, and getting right out down the track there, like potentially about how can what can we use the data to actually give farmers benefits from environmental credits or blue bonds. How big's the market? So oysters, we've calculated there's about 18,000 farms of addressable farms that are looking for our solution. We've been fairly conservative with these numbers. And when we roll up seaweed, finfish, and mussels, there's nearly 100,000 farms that we believe will be looking for the SmartOyster solution. And we believe we'll capture about 7% of them. So that's our goal, to get about 7,500 farms over the next few years. To date, we've been all around the world, literally. So traveled there, myself and our sales manager, Cole, have traveled around the world, met farmers, and we've got just about 50 oyster farms using SmartOysters in the US, New Zealand, the UK, Ireland, even the UAE. And we've also manage the actual capture and capture all the different farming methods of oyster farming. So the great thing about SmartOysters is that the app itself is customizable. We don't ask the farmers to conform to a standardized database. What we do is we go to them with an app that has customizable forms, and we say, we want to capture what you're doing. We want to help you do it better. The magic behind SmartOysters is then we take that unstructured farm practice data, we structure it behind the scenes, then we push it back into that dashboard I've shown you to actually give them insights into their farm. And knowing that we needed to have that really flexible, adaptable system has allowed us to sell to all different farmers all over the world, but also have traction with mussels farms, seaweed farms, finfish farms. We've had inquiries from other farms, agricultural farms as well. So SmartOysters is a subscription-based software as a service. So based on the size and complexity of farms, farmers pay a monthly subscription. We are looking to obviously expand outside oysters to finfish, seaweed, mussels, and shrimp. And down the track, we can see we can add value, through financing by integrating sensor data, and certification. Customer growth. The next 2 years, we want to go from 50 farms to 600. And that'll be a revenue of about $2 million. So trying to keep it nice and conservative early on. We know that there's many small farms out there. Our challenge is to break a farmer's habit of using memory. But once we do know that once we really develop the platform, make it even more intuitive, easy to onboard, and we actually get some beachheads in these other sectors like seaweed and mussels and finfish, we expect to accelerate, the onboard acquisition of customers quite rapidly, moving on from there. Our competitors. So I love talking about our competitors because they're just not us. So pretty much all of our competitors are using that decades-old database solution. It's the same sort of database systems that I was using on my PC all these years. And again, it's always asking the farmer to conform their farm practice to a standard database in order to get that valuable information back from the software. So SmartOysters is the only solution that is designed around a GPS map, like GPS maps, so the farmer can use the app to actually navigate around their farm and see what needs to be done. It's the only solution focused on farm operations. Like I talked about before, other systems tend to focus on the performance of the oyster and tracking how the oyster performs through a system, which when you have a continually changing environment is never the same. It doesn't give you huge insight into how to farm better. We really focus on helping the farmer maximize their productivity by giving them insights on their farm performance. Are you optimizing all your baskets? How efficiently are you producing oysters? And we're one of the only solutions that was really built in the capacity to integrate other data like sensors and push provenance and farm data up the supply chain to create value for the farmer. We're also the only solution with global traction. So of all the companies listed there, they're mostly regional based. Aqua Manager, Europe and the US. Oyster Tracker, just the US. Oyster Cloud Australia, and MyShell, just South Australia. SmartOysters has sort of stamped its mark as being the only company that is operating in just about every oyster region around the world. Another little quick sort of graph there, really just sort of showing that SmartOysters differentiated out on the top right hand corner there. We're focused about farm practice, and we really help the farmers sort of navigate using the GPS maps. A lot of other farmers, all the other systems are really they focus on sort of the production and performance of the product. We've got some great testimonials there. If you've watched the video on our Birchal site, we've posted some of them. Also on Facebook, we'll have a few more up-to-date testimonials coming from some of our farms. We've shouted out to the farms around the world using SmartOysters and asked them to send in some testimonials. Oh, and our team. So myself, Ewan McCash, we've got James who's here today, and Matthew Parry, who is our CFO. Colin Bridges, the business development manager. He's actually my brother-in-law. He's been working in SmartOysters. He's really been the engine room of SmartOysters now for the last 4 years. So he's Mr. SmartOyster. We've recently employed James Rickard, who's our lead developer and really driving the tech development. My sister Claire, who has been working for Signature Oysters, so she's got a great rapport with farmers. She's working as a support manager to get those farmers on board and making sure they're getting the most out of SmartOysters. And Dave Pigeon, he's the guy that is building all our demonstration videos, which you'll see later on, or if you go to our website. He also does a lot of the marketing stuff. So our roadmap, we've delivered a market-leading operations app. We've got worldwide traction. We've really validated that our focus on operations works and farmers want it. We are now, looking to grow that market and accelerate it, and engage with new sectors. And as we move forward, we want to grow. So it's really about making sure that the system is ready to go from 50 to 5,000 oyster farms and seaweed farms and mussel farms. Again, that's what the investment we are looking to raise will be used for. It's to ramp up the sales and marketing. It's to develop our tech foundation so we can scale from 50 to 5,000 and build out that team to really deliver on that. The goal, for 2022 is to be the dominant oyster operations platform, to get those first sales, to take those pilot programs to commercialize them, and also see if we can solve this problem for farmers in terms of establishing some sort of financing using their data. Yep, so the leading product for aquaculture, the concept for aquaculture investment worldwide. Just before I jump back, or I'll just jump back on screen, but I think one of the reasons you guys are all following, here the webinar and you're following me and supporting SmartOysters is that we love oysters. And you might be surprised to know, but 90% of all aquaculture worldwide is small farmers. They are, small family-owned businesses. They're out there growing sustainable seafood. And that's what SmartOysters is about. It's about giving them a tool, become more efficient, to better spend their time, have some days off, and if we can help those guys increase their productivity, we can have a huge impact in terms of the amount of product that's being grown around the world, and also those beneficial impacts of, of the ecosystem services that oysters bring. They filter the water, they create ecosystem and, allow animals to, create a biodiversity in our reef systems. And they also sequester carbon and nitrogen to an extent. So that's why I'm excited about SmartOysters, because I can see it having a huge impact. We can get it into the hands of more farmers around the world.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ewan, for a really good and comprehensive presentation about SmartOysters. I loved especially your comment around working with farmers with this technology. It's not, here it is, you have to conform to how we've built this platform. It's building it individually for various farmers and to make it work for them and their operations. So yeah, a really fantastic presentation, and keen to open up to Q&A. We've had 9 questions come through so far, which is really exciting. Just before we kick off, I just want to give a quick overview of the Birchal process from here. So currently the webinar we're in, and expressing interest in the company, this really is just an exploration phase to learn a little bit more about SmartOysters as a potential investor. The next campaign, which is due to launch on the 25th of May, which is very exciting, is the actual offer campaign. So at that point in the process, you will be able to have access to what is the company offer document, their constitution and their subscription agreement. So in that offer document, it's a very heavily regulated document, regulated by ASIC, where SmartOysters, you and James and the team will have to provide some information about their company to you, potential investors, which will include their 12 months of recently completed financial statements, information about the company, rights associated with your shares, use of funds, and information like that. So if some of those questions are not answered today in some of the Q&As, lo and behold, rest assured, that will be available on the 25th of May. But I also think that Ewan and James are putting the final touches on that document, and all the EOIs will get a little sneak peek of the draft of that document ahead of the 25th. So yeah, hold on to your horses there, but we'll hop into Q&A and I'll just rocket down the list of what's come through. So the first question we've had through, James or Ewan, whoever would like to answer, is SmartOysters currently profitable?
No. So for us to become profitable, we need to hit 170 farmers based on their current subscription levels. So right now we've got 50 farmers using SmartOysters. But that'll be our aim, to quite rapidly get to that 170 mark. That'll break even, and then from there, it is quite a profitable business model. So we are looking at like 80% gross margins once we start getting above that break-even point. So yeah.
Cool. Another question has come through, but I'm going to take this one as a comment. It just says, I think you need to make friends with merchant banker. We'll take that as a comment, or friends with lots of passionate crowdfunded investors, which is why we're all here. So thank you for that. Thank you for that input to that person. The next question that's come through is, how much are you looking to raise ideally? Worst case scenario, what's the minimum you need to raise? In a perfect world, what would you need to raise to scale up your operations?
Yeah, so from the crowdfunding, we're looking to raise between $400,000 to $600,000. Ultimately, we want to raise about 1.2, but we do have a strategic investor that is coming on board that's going to help with that.
Awesome. And that's also information that will be included in the offer document, and full disclosure about that and the strategic investor coming on board for those who are interested to see when it comes out. Another question's come through about the percentage of the company you're looking to open up to investors. Is that still getting the final touches on it, or have we landed on an idea?
We'll have the draft letter of offer out soon, and those details will be in there.
Yeah, beautiful. Another question that's come through is return on investment and the future of SmartOysters. So just for those listening as well, again, under crowdsourced funding, because it is primarily a retail investment opportunity of an Australian security, there's certain things we can and can't say in terms of return on investment. We can't promise returns on investment in companies that use this regime. Investing in early stage companies is risky by nature, but companies like, SmartOysters obviously have a bit of a plan of how they want to, get return on investment for their investors. Ewan and James, I'm sure the team have personally invested in the business themselves and want to see it succeed. But interested to know, Ewan and James, your thoughts, not guaranteeing them, but what is the exit that you're thinking about for this company? Are you planning to pay dividends, or are you planning to trade, sale, IPO, anything like that? What is the future for SmartOysters in your mind?
Do you want to talk to that, James? I feel like I'm doing all the talking.
Of course. Look, I think, it's really, the focus really is about, capital growth in the business rather than dividends, I guess, typically in this business. I think the longer term view really is either an exit through a trade sale or some form of acquisition. One of our strategic investors is, potentially may well be part of that process. And look, I wouldn't rule out the fact that depending on how the business develops, it actually could be more appropriate to go to some kind of IPO. Because as I think, as Ewan had alluded to, the information that we gather out of farm operations actually could be leveraged for a whole bunch of other things, whether it's around de-risking loans to access operational assets, to look at propagating environmental credits. There's a whole range of possible, in a sense, spin-off or related business opportunities, that may create a broader revenue model, which may well be more, in a sense, more attuned to an IPO rather than simply a trade sale. The other, I guess, the other kind of key part of that story is that we're very much aware that at some point in the next 4 to 5 years, there is really a strategic pivot, that as we've got enough farmers on board, the accumulated information that the farmers have around their activities, becomes enormously valuable. Now, in saying that, we're also quite, what's core to our principle is the farmers own the data. So we're certainly not advocating that we're going to harvest the data and commercialise it. We kind of recognise that there's a point where there's an information business that actually is potentially even more valuable than just simply the activity business. We haven't really scoped that, but that will have a big impact on how we think about where we go from 5 years to 5 years plus in that space.
Yeah, awesome. And I've had another question come through from a potential investor about investor engagement and future capital raises. So a few questions in here, but all related, which is good. So number one, how will the company keep shareholders in the loop? If you raise a capital, are you planning to do monthly, quarterly operating reports? Is there a way for the company to determine a medium-term timeline for when further funding will be needed? So if this is a successful crowdfunding raise, will you be looking to do future raises, after this raise, through crowdsourced funding or through another avenue? And how do you expect to keep investors in the loop on that?
Definitely initially we'll be keeping investors, probably doing quarterly newsletters. I'm fairly experienced with that with my other businesses. So keeping the loop that way. And in terms of, we're hoping to raise enough, in this round to get us through to profitable operations. Where we are going to where we would come back and raise more money, it would be about breaking into new markets, so operation, basically where we'd raise more money would be about accelerating the growth of the company. And so obviously we're quite excited about this crowdfunding campaign and the opportunity it presents to actually come back to our crowdfunding shareholders and ask them to contribute down the track.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on that, I think there's, beyond aquaculture, there's an applications for this, our activity-based approach or operations approach in other, terrestrial-based, farming. And it's not our core focus, but there's potentially a growth pathway through that, through a business model that might involve strategic partners or some other kind of arrangement that may call on the need for additional funding. And as I said, the other part of the model that will become apparent will be that information business and how that gets leveraged.
So what KPIs will the company use to assess the performance of SmartOysters itself? Will it be number of farms signed up to the platform? Or do you have other sort of KPIs that you are thinking about that goes, yeah, we're doing really well?
So I'll answer that. The KPIs is definitely sales acquisition. So number of farms we're signing up, and the subscription rate, or the subscription average subscription rate. So obviously we want to sign up more farms and continue to create more value so they pay more. Yeah.
Another question that's come through is that this investment opportunity is for SmartOysters. Does that include companies like Smart Mussels, Smart Finfish, Smart Seaweed? What is the structure of SmartOysters to the other companies? Is it just the parent company with other brands that are going to be popping up underneath it, or will you be doing separate entities for each company?
Good question. So, look, I think you might have seen a little logo sneak into one of those slides. So one of the things we're very conscious of is really to create an umbrella brand. And so while the company today is called SmartOysters, our expectation will be to rebrand the company in a more generic way. I mean, the working title we have now is Blue Culture, and SmartOysters, Smart Mussels, Smart Finfish, Smart Seaweed will all be product names underneath that brand.
Awesome.
And just to answer that question most simply, is if you're investing in SmartOysters, you're also investing in all the Smart Mussels, Smart Seaweed. So it's not separate entities. We're going to keep it to one entity.
That too. Another question that's come through: why are you choosing equity crowdfunding instead of angel investment? Obviously, I know the answer to this, and I know why equity crowdfunding is awesome, which is why I work at Birchal. But what really drew SmartOysters to equity crowdfunding over, a smaller private group of investors?
I'll hand to you in a sec too, but my sense of it is that I think, one of the things that we kind of struggled with dealing with venture capital funders is that we're actually finding investors that were aligned to our values, and that's hard. That's hard to deal with with venture capitalists that are really driven by, what I would call a fast money, big exit story. And, we're dealing with, a lot of embedded values to do with sustainability and environment, and maybe to jump in there, one of the things that Ewan alluded to is that if you talk to a lot of our farmers, about the value that SmartOysters brings, they don't necessarily jump to efficiency or staff retention. The first thing they'll talk about is quality of life. Now, using quality of life as a KPI doesn't necessarily get VC capital people jumping up and down, but it is, we believe it's the sort of thing that smaller investors, and certainly it's a far more relatable set of values, I think, in a crowd equity funded arrangement than it is in what I call the big money approach.
Yeah, totally. And look, I mean, from our point of view as Birchal, one of the things that we love helping companies with these crowdfunding raises is this idea that your customers can become your investors and become your most passionate brand advocates. So as the company grows, the people who really supported you from the very beginning get to share in that growth and get to share in your success, rather than a handful of few that come in at the start. However, that being said, if you're an angel investor listening to this, you're also very welcome.
We're happy. I think at a personal level, I think one of the things that's been really gratifying, and I know all the team is that, in our approach, is the number of people that we know, whether customers or, friends, that have registered interest that we wouldn't have ordinarily, necessarily approached. And yet they've stepped in and they've shown a level of interest, which in itself is very validating for us as founders.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, like, from the beginning of SmartOysters, even by the company's interest, I've looked for ways to involve farmers, that are actually supported me early on, adopted it and helped me develop the application. And this crowdfunding platform gives them the opportunity to actually invest in SmartOysters in a really easy way. So there's been plenty of customers that are actually expressing interest in putting some money in SmartOysters.
Yeah, I love that. Could you give us a little bit of a rundown of the key risks you see in the business, especially, in the next bit of your roadmap? What are the key risks, and do you have any thoughts on how you mitigate those risks at this point?
You want to jump in on that one, James?
Well, I think the first one is we're a small team. So, the obvious risk for us is key people risk. Everyone has a role, and as much as we wear lots of hats, we can't afford to, lose people, and so that ultimately, it's that, if somebody gets run over by the proverbial bus, that's a risk. Staff retention is, given that we've got long-term relationships, some of them are family, it does create a level of sustainability. But I guess part of the mitigation there is also the development of putting in place a employee share options plan that will be quite, hopefully we want to be quite generous around those to let them share in the growth and prosperity of the business.
Yeah, terrific. And, in terms of that, on the topic of those key risks, I know that was a bit of a topic jump before, but for the investor that has asked that, a table of key risks will also be included in the offer document and how it will impact SmartOysters as well. So when that draft of the offer document is circulated, hopefully next week, you'll be able to go through. And I know that both, just speaking on behalf of you, Ewan and James, very happy to hop on the phone with anyone to have a chat if they'd like to ask you more questions about, any of the things we've spoken about today.
Yeah. I might add the other key risk in some ways that we've had to navigate over the past year is COVID. Our US farmers, where we've got the largest block of farmers in our user base, had 5 hurricanes last year, and in Victoria we had, the southern part of New South Wales, oyster growing had bushfires, and the northern side has just had floods. So I guess biblical events. We're just waiting now for. We've had fire, flood, pestilence, so just sort of waiting for a plague of locusts. But those sort of things do impact our business, and as much as we haven't lost a lot of customers in that process, for example, during the COVID period, and some of the hurricanes, we decided to suspend subscriptions to some of the farmers because we didn't think it was kind of fair to ask them to keep paying when their farms weren't operating. And so there are some of those things that cause a financial hit really but we're doing that on the basis of a long-term relationship.
Yeah, I would say that just from a farmer's perspective, natural disasters, put farmers off their game, and distract them from actually engaging with new technology. So we've seen obviously that with COVID, it's hard to get a farmer to sign. We get it. It's hard to complete an onboarding when a farmer's on lockdown and can't leave their house. You know, I think Ireland went through 3 lockdowns. So yeah, and just moving forward, I think, you know, the focus is really on, you know, accelerating growth. How do we get farmers to sign up as fast as we can, and to mitigate the risk of that is about making sure the app and our onboarding process is seamless as possible and as engaging as possible, so that farmers can get the value out of the app, and we'll see, you know, great uptake.
And I think part of that mitigation too is creating communities of customers and farmers. I mean, you know, and really using, you know, working, you know, what's the right word? It's I hate to use the word leveraging all the time, but it is about kind of capitalising in a way on, you know, the existing relationships at a regional level between farmers, so that where there's a critical mass of SmartOysters users, that it naturally becomes a way of being able to communicate practices more efficiently between farms, and potentially even sharing information. So we think that creates a much more resilient customer base that becomes a lot more self-sufficient. And, you know, we kind of see that as, and I suppose it's that in a way that's kind of what makes us different, in the sense that as much as trying to focus on small farms is harder, and there are risks associated with that, the other side is that small farms are resilient and adaptable, and, you know, working with them and helping them become more resilient, you know, is our way of, in a sense, managing, you know, the risk associated with those relationships, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. I was actually just thinking on that note, you, and I know you actually had a little bit of a demo of the platform that you were going to show today, if you'd like to show it in terms of how the app works. Just noting on our Q&A, we've got a few questions that have been put up, which I think we've answered either in the Q&A or in the presentation already. There is one question left that I would like to ask you, and then I think we might wrap up the session off that if there's no more questions. But before we go to that final question, you and I can pass the hosting back to you if you'd like to show a demo of how SmartOysters actually works. Yeah,
I will, because often we get it, you know, you see the pitch video and you get a sense of how the apps works, but I'll just show a little video in action doing the most valuable task an oyster farmer can do, which is record stock movements, for the reasons I described about how many they can do, you know, how many can be done in a day. Just share screen. This video. So I'm just going to talk over this. You know, there's a SmartOysters app that you download off, you know, the app, your app store. You can see there, that's the map, where we've actually, you know, basically mapped the farmer's lease lines and other operating infrastructure. So this farmer's gone out on the water. They're putting out 50 oyster baskets, and this is really just talking the farmer through about, you know, if you stop, spend 10 seconds and record this stock movement. So the farmer will choose we call them channels, but really the crop that they are deploying. And then once you've chosen that sort of action, then it's really quite intuitive in terms of how you then collect the information. It's a bit slow. So therefore, the farmer just talked through, like, what size oysters you're putting out there, what type of basket, again, all customizable, the number of baskets, 50, and then the density of the basket, so 100. There's ability there to actually take a photo of the oysters, which I think they'll do in a little minute. And then at the bottom of the screen, you can see the report status. So we customize the actual scheduling. So these, you know, on this farm, there's a default there for inspect in 12 weeks. So, and that's really about recording what you've just deployed, where it is, and then automatically scheduling that next task. So inspect these oysters in 12 weeks time. What's really powerful about the way we've set those customizable forms up, and what makes it so engaging for farmers, is that we can change the language. You know, in Ireland, they use bushels, not dozens. In the US, they use units, like pieces. We've got a sustainable finfish farm in Mexico that actually has Spanish language. So again, going back to this idea where we go to the farmer and say, we don't, you know, how do you farm? Let's help you do that. And we customize these forms and fields to capture, you know, in their language what they're doing, and then push it back to them into the database.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love it. And I think in our follow-up email to all those who are attending the webinar, we'll pop in the link as well to that demo video. So if you want to see it in real time, because Zoom is a bit of a pain in terms of showing these demos and other videos on a Zoom. If you'd like to see it in real time, you can. I think the final question that we've got for
today. Can I also?
Oh yes, of course.
One question. I did promise to give a shout out to one of the people that responded to the OI, Henry Webb, who actually asked me a very valid question last night around SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals.
Oh, yes.
And it was a nice prompt because we don't actually refer to them, and we should. And the short answer is yes, we do align with them. And specifically 12, which is around responsible consumption and production. And of course, that relates to provenance and traceability and ability to for our farmers ultimately to be able to do that because they're collecting data. The other part is 13, which is about climate change. And just quickly, we've got a couple of initiatives around that where we're working with a startup in Tasmania called Southern Ocean Carbon, who are looking to develop an environmentally friendly way of using seaweed to sequester carbon in a sort of a non-industrial model. And the other part, and we're also dealing with we've just signed an MOU with a US-based not-for-profit called Greenwave, which is also looking at promoting, has a program around regenerative ocean farming and how to bring seaweed into mixed polyculture and with oyster farming, and you know, basically providing a whole bunch of environmental measurable outcomes. And then again, that relates to sustainable, the 14th goal, which is around life below water, which is really around sustainable aquaculture as it relates to small farms, local economies and communities.
Yeah, fantastic.
So that's the quick potted response. So I guess I just wanted to fit that in. I promised Henry I would, and we'll certainly document that up, and it'll be part of the collateral we put out.
No, it's great. And look, I think there's a real drive for now businesses to be better in the future in terms of their SDGs, their commitment to the various goals. And it's really great to hear that SmartOysters is looking to align with those sustainable development goals and, yeah, really weave that into the business model. So thrilled to hear. That is like, it's a slightly elegant segue, but maybe not, into the final question that I have for you both. I'm actually condensing two questions into one because they're somewhat similar. One attendee has asked, have you thought about approaching prawn farmers? And another attendee has also asked about, is this technology adaptable to other forms of farming such as cow, pig, sheep, things like that? So what's your take on, sort of prawn farming and then other agriculture outside of aquaculture?
Well, we sort of touched on it in some ways, because I think, and as Ewan pointed out, I mean, because we're focused on activities are quite similar across. If you think about farming, well, if you break it all down to its most fundamental, it's knowing what to do, where to do it, when to do it and how to do it. And those are the core building blocks of SmartOysters. If you're coming at it from a production point of view, you tend to be focused around, how do you define the cow or the oyster, or the seaweed. And so that inherently becomes more difficult to adapt across different settings. So the short answer is yes, all of those. And as Ewan pointed out, we've had some inquiries around shrimp farming about how that might work. I mean, the core, if there's anything that the most fundamental, I suppose, sweet spot, if you will, is for SmartOysters, is that it's about human behaviour and managing those schedules. So what we aren't really is a tool for industrial farming, which is all driven around technology and sensors, and where the human engagement in the process is actually commoditized or actually even automated out. And so that's the differentiation for us. So anywhere in that farming model. We've even had a farm, just a quick, sorry. I mean, the other point I was going to make is that we've even had an approach from a winery, a vineyard, basically, who are in New Zealand who've been using the product, just trialing it and experimenting and how that might be used in that context.
Yeah, cool. And I hadn't even thought of that as an application. But Ewan?
Just about every farmer I talk to sees a role for SmartOysters. Most recently, a free-range chook farmer, apiarist, beehive. So back to what there's so many small sustainable farmers out there that are very niche, that have unique farm practice that can't be industrialized, but and they're the ones that are like, yeah, how do I, I've developed a way to grow free-range chooks on my land, but how do I have a holiday and transfer that knowledge? So the answer is yes, and the answer is, but also from a focus point of view, we're going to nail aquaculture, and then before we get too carried away with other industries.
Yeah, and that also relates to the question about future funding. I think in some ways that really that's the, beyond aquaculture is, how do we intend to approach those, or, what is the funding associated with setting those up? There are other issues around sensor technology and blockchain and AI and all these sort of things that start to play. But at this stage in our process, it's about let's collect the basics. What gets done, where it gets done, how it gets done. Those other pieces will start to become more apparent.
I have this funny visual in my head of talking to a beekeeper and asking what tech they use. And they go, oh, I use SmartOysters to manage my bees.
Smart bees.
Smart bees, exactly. Well, look, Ewan and James, thank you so much for joining me today on the webinar to give a little bit more information about the business and the opportunity that is ahead. To everyone attending, once again, we are hoping to have a draft of the offer document out next week, so you can have a look about all those things that were asked about and talked about in today's webinar, including the historical financial information of the company for the last 12 months, cap table, industry size, what they want to do with the funds, where they see the future roadmap of SmartOysters going. But I do know as well that both Ewan and James are definitely available to have emails, phone calls, chats, whatever, with you if you'd like to know more about anything. So we will be passing on their details to you in a follow-up email, so you can reach out directly, or you never know, they might just call you. If you'd like to learn anything else about Birchal, equity crowdfunding in general and how it all works, I'm very happy to help you as well at claire@birchal.com, or hit our help chatbot on our site, but we'll pop in our details as well. So if you have any questions, just flick them through. But on that note, thank you so much for your attendance. Ewan and James, thank you so much for your expertise and knowledge. And yes, really looking forward to this raise opening on May 25th.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, everyone, for turning up.
You.
Yeah, get in contact.
Bye.